I get up here, they sometimes tell us stories about working on a vacuum pump or fixing a car or some other piece of machinery. Surprising everyone? No one. I don't work on those types of machines. And in fact, the only stories I have of working on those types of machines involve a lot of my blood coming out of my body. So I'll save those for another sermon. They'll be fun, but not for today. One time, though, once upon a time, I used to do a lot of work with a sewing machine. So I'm going to tell you a story about a sewing machine. Over the years, I have sewn skirts and blankets and curtains and children's clothes. I even sewed my own wedding dress. And over the years, I developed a way of sewing that worked for me and for my body. And although I was never perfect at it, I had the basics down. And I got a lot of satisfaction from the experience. The things I made, for the most part, fit, and they served their purpose well. And you all know the story. 6 years ago, my energy levels tanked, and I ended up in bed pretty much all the time for 3.5 years. And so sewing didn't happen for a long time, for some reason. And then we moved into the new house, and I had this awesome chair that lets me do all the wondrous things, and slowly have had my life come back. And so last week, I decided I was going to try a new sewing project. New cushions for our couch on our back deck. Janelle, can you go to the next slide? Now, this couch was in perfectly reasonable condition. It's only a year old, so it shouldn't really have needed new cushions except pandemic. Because it was purchased in the middle of a lockdown, and so we didn't get to sit on it in the store. And it wasn't until it was fully assembled and the cushions were down on it that we realized that the 1.5 inch thick cushions were really, really thin, and you could feel the rattan under your butt when you sat on them. Most of you have tried the cushions out, you know what I'm talking about. So this summer I decided I was going to make thick, comfortable cushions for it. I was so excited. I think I have enough energy, I should be able to sew them up, it should be great. So I measured, and I went and bought materials, and I measured again, and I cut, and I sewed, and I had started with the big cushion for the base of the couch. I was so proud of myself when I got it finished. And then Trevor took it out to put it on the couch, and then we realized it was 12 inches short. How was that possible? Where had I gone wrong? Well, I measured each of the individual cushions on their own, but because it was so hot outside, I didn't want to go outside to measure the whole length, and I'd added 24 inches plus 24 inches plus 24 inches and somehow came up with 60 inches. I think I'm out of practice, instead of the 72 inches that you all just realized it was. So I went back to the store and I bought some more materials, and I worked out a way to avoid having to pay too much extra for my mistake. And I started again. I thought, okay, I've got it figured out. I know where the problem was. I'll do all the measuring right on the deck. It was a cooler day that day. It'll be fine, it'll be good. But no, this project, I took out almost as many seams as I put in. There was mistake after mistake after mistake. And it made me realize that I was not only out of practice, but I had far less energy than I used to have, and I had forgotten the right way to sew. And in this case, because I've never done upholstery before, I was also missing some of the tools and knowledge I needed to do it the right way in the first place. Small problem. But I was working on this at the same time as I was thinking I should really be writing a sermon, but I didn't have a sermon to write. And so the two ideas sort of conflated each other, and I realized that there was a connection here. So we are in John chapter 14 this morning. We've gotten all the way to chapter 14. Are we excited? Are we impressed? Started John in September, just so you know. So we are flying through it at our regular pace. And this morning we're starting with verse 1, not to go too fast. We're still at the table for the Last Supper. We're still listening to the dialogue between Jesus and the disciples, now minus Judas. And this is what it says. Jesus said to his disciples, "Don't be worried. Have faith in God and have faith in me. There are many rooms in my Father's house. I wouldn't tell you this if it wasn't true. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. After I've done this, I will come back and take you with me. Then we will be together. You know the way to where I am going." And Thomas said, "Lord, we don't even know where you are going. How can we know the way?" "I am the way, the truth, and the life," Jesus answered. "Without me, no one can go to the Father. If you had really known me, you would have known the Father, but from now on you do know him and you have seen him." Philip said, "Lord, show us the Father. That is all we need." Jesus replied, Philip, I have been with you for a long time." Can't you hear that in there? "Don't you know who I am? If you have seen me, you have seen the Father. How can you ask me to show you the Father? Don't you believe that I am one with the Father and the Father is one with me? What I say isn't said on my own. The Father who lives in me does these things. Have faith in me when I say that the Father is one with me and that I am one with the Father. Or else, have faith in me simply because of the things I do. I tell you for certain that if you have faith in me, you will do the same things I am doing. You will do even greater things now that I am going back to the Father. Ask me, and I will do whatever you ask. This way the Son will bring honor to the Father. I will do whatever you ask to do." So, this passage is full of all sorts of tidbits. I could probably preach 5 or 6 sermons just from this short section. And I thought about it for a few minutes. I could just take our whole afternoon. But then I was like, it's summer. We're a small crowd. And, when people start to drift off in 1s and 5s and 10s, it won't take very long for the room to clear. So I'd better stick with something, a little shorter and sweeter. I'm going to do more of a meditation of sorts this morning. So way back over the winter, Nathan introduced us to John's I am statements, right? Starting in John 6:35, these include I am the bread of life, the light of the world, the door, the good shepherd. Are you figuring out which each of the symbols is up there? The resurrection and the life, the way, the truth and the life, and the vine. And Nathan explained that these statements by Jesus are there to help us to understand who Jesus is and what Jesus came to do. But this passage reminds us that they're more important than that. Because they also tell us who God, the Father, is. And they tell us about the relationship God wants to have with us. That's Jesus' point as he's talking to Philip in the passage when he says, "Don't you know who I am? If you have seen me, you have seen the Father." So these statements help us know who God the Father is and who Jesus is, and I don't know, Nathan or Roy's going to get to it in a few weeks, who the Spirit is as well, and the relationship that they want to collectively have with us. And today's I am statement is this second to last one. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I figured we could take an entire sermon just on that part. No matter what it is that we want to do in life, there are better and worse ways of achieving those goals, right? There are better and worse ways of making couch cushions, and I clearly only know some of the right ways to do those things. The results of my efforts were passable, but when you come and sit on the couches, although they are now comfortable, there's some interesting extra seams you might not be expecting. We're just going to appreciate that they're comfortable. That's the plan, okay? The process also took far longer than it should have and cost more than it really needed to. I'm sorry, Trevor. And if only I had known the right way to do it to begin with. And many of you, though, have become experts in careers I know nothing about. I told Rob last night he needed to be here for the sermon because apparently he had preemptively read it and was helping me out with it. But last night at Barbecue, Rob was telling us stories from his work as an electrician and an electrical teacher, and I kid you not, the next little section I wrote last week. Because Because it says, I have no idea what the right way to wire an electrical socket is. But not only can Rob do it, and not only can he teach others how to do it, he can teach the teachers of others how to do it. I kid you not. I told him he needed to be here. He can't even heckle me. I don't have my phone. He knows the way so deeply, I went on to write, that he's going to see the subtlest of mistakes across a room and notice even the smallest errors and know how those things will trip someone up in what they're doing down the road. This is what Rob was talking about at the Vox barbecue last night. I think Janelle's in a similar position when it comes to his work as a paramedic. Same for Trevor, same for Michelle, same for Taya and for Hope, and for most of you in your careers. The wonderful thing about being slightly on the older side is that we've had lots of years to develop our experience, right? And we know the right way to do our jobs. We know the deepest intricacies of electricity or computer code or MRI technicianing or teaching or paramedicing. And it's a good thing that we know how to do those things, right? We also know the risks of not doing things right. We can look at the way someone who is maybe new to our field is doing something and pretty much automatically realize, yeah, that's not going to work out so well. I'd really rather you didn't do it that way. Oh yeah, you don't want to do that. Please stop! You know, all those different levels. And as I think about these ways we have of doing things, and Jesus' statement of, I am the way, connections start to form for me. Because you see, Jesus' life and teaching gives us insight into the way we're meant to live life. Jesus offers us his life as an example for the way that human beings were designed to live. Proverbs 14:12 warns us that there is a way that seems right to a person, but its end is the way of death. And many of us wander around pretty convinced that we've figured out life. We do things the way that we do for the good reasons. I'm not doubting that. They make us feel good. Maybe they scratch an itch. Maybe they seem to help us deal with the pain that life is full of. But unfortunately, that doesn't always mean that the way we're doing things is going to work out in the long run. And I'm not just talking about the big things people worry about, like cheating on a spouse or stealing from an employer or murdering someone. Like, please. Jesus is pretty clear throughout the Gospels with his "you have heard it said, but I tell you" statements, that the way we think about one another and the way we respond to the things life throws at us matters, not just at the big level, but down in the nitty-gritty, everyday, mundane things of life. The way we think about ourselves and the stories we tell about ourselves and about each other matters almost as much to God as what we do and what we say on the big things. And there are so many ways to wire an electrical socket, so many ways to show up at the scene of an accident or program computer code or teach grade 2, 3 at the same time. I don't even know how you do it. There's even so many ways to sew couch cushions. And we know that some of those are going to work out better than others. The same is true with our everyday lives. There is a best way for us as individuals to live, and Jesus is the one who shows us how to live it. Jesus' way can feel hard, though. Do not even look with lust at another person. Don't worry about what you're going to eat or drink or what you're going to wear, even in the middle of like crazy inflation and stupid high rent prices. Don't store up treasure on earth where moth and rust will destroy, even if you're worried about losing your job. They're counterintuitive to the ways we think will work out, and yet, if we want to know how to live life, Jesus tells us, I am the way. We've also got an awful lot of competing voices around us all the time. I think we might be a slide or two behind, Janelle. Claiming to offer us truth. See, it's good. It's good. I don't put jokes in very well, so I thought I'd find a... From memes on Facebook to in-depth analysis in The Atlantic, from pop songs to academic publishers, those who can convince us that they hold the keys to truth come to have power over us to influence not only our beliefs, but our actions, not only the way we speak to one another, but the way we understand ourselves. And so Jesus' next words here, I am the truth, can easily get lost in the myriad of truth claims out there. So what do we do about this? At Vox, we always want to come back to the words of Jesus. But it's bugging me. I can't see Elijah. But I don't want you to just take my word for it. So often in religious circles, we've been taught to think that if the person on the stage in front of us says the truth, then, and if they say it strongly and firmly and forcefully enough, that it will make it true somehow. I brought a spare Rob. The problem is, most of us have seen too many authority figures do this, where we knew blatantly well that what they were saying didn't match up with either how they were living or what we had experienced. And just as an aside, I personally really hope you never believe something simply because I happen to say it from up here. That's a dumb reason. Don't do it. You can think about what I've said. You can ask questions about it. You might even come to the same conclusion, but don't do it just because I said it. That's not a good enough reason. Over the years, many people have talked about the way truth has shifted from being found in the authority structures of the pre-modern era to being found in the science and experts of the modern era, and now to moving into a postmodern experience-based model. And I've got a new fancy pants word for you this morning, because there's a word for this experiential truth. It's the word phenomenology. Do you want to try it with me? Phenomenology. Oh yeah, oh yeah. And put as simply as possible, phenomenology is this idea that truth can be known and understood through the way we experience things. I'm going to be using it in my thesis this year. So now you all know what I mean if I accidentally use that word. And so for me, a lot of my reconstruction work in terms of my faith has been rooted in looking for these phenomenological experiences to back up what I was reading in Scripture. I shared last month about some of the many, many occasions I have come across scriptures that seemed too good to be true. It seemed outside of my experience. And I turned to God and I said, prove it. It's all well and good it's in there, but prove it. I need to know this is real. And one of those verses was John 8:32, which says, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I came across this verse for what was easily the 50th or 100th time at some point about 7 years ago, at a time when I was feeling decidedly unfree. I have a self-portrait I drew that I'm not going to share because I am not an artist. But I drew it at the time. You can imagine like stick figures, sort of like grade 3, 4 level art. That's me. I drew in one of my journals this picture of me trapped in a prison under a hill. And all around me, it's green and beautiful and alive, if a little stick figure-y. But then there's me, trapped in the dark of a black and gray prison. And so the verse felt really far-fetched when I read it that day. That there was even a way to find freedom seemed impossible. That there was a way to find the truth that would set me free seemed ridiculous. So I said to God, prove it. And then I started making time every day, sometimes multiple times a day, for weeks, and then months, and eventually several years, to try to figure out the difference between the things I thought were true about me and the way I was made to live, and about Jesus and the way he demonstrated for us to follow, and what was actually true, experientially provable about all of those things. Now, I started this journey a Christian. I'd prayed the sinner's prayer when I was 3 years old. I'd been baptized when I was 7. I'd read the Bible cover to cover multiple times. I'd gone to church for most of my life. I'd even been to a one-year Bible school at this point. But over the years, I had spent far more time finding out what other people said the truth of Jesus was, and not nearly enough time with Jesus experiencing the truth that set me free. It was a heck of a long journey. I had to get honest about things I had done and ways I had been living and trying to live that were not only not great, but were actively sabotaging my life and hurting the people around me. I had to get honest about the ways I had twisted and shaped Jesus into something that made sense with and cooperated well within my culture, but had nothing to do with who Jesus was and what he said and what he did. And while I now know that this will be a lifelong pursuit of the truth that sets me free, I think those of you who have known me for a while here at Vox will know how much digging into this truth that is found in Jesus, really has set me free. But I don't want to stop pursuing the truth that sets me free. I've seen the difference this has made, and I wouldn't want any less of it than was possible in my life. And I definitely don't want to forget and get distracted and start doing things my way again. The temptation is so real, and the risks are so great. And I know I'm not always going to get it right, but I want to keep on showing up the next day to figure it out a little bit better. So I did something this week that might surprise some of you. I got my first tattoo. There was a picture of it, Janelle. Did it disappear? There we go. It's an image of a padlock, and it's unlocked with a key that's set into it. And on the head of the key is a trefoil, which is an ancient symbol for the Trinity, for the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And it helps me to remember that there is a truth that sets us free, and it is found in Jesus as the reflection of the Father, whispered into our ears through the wind of the Holy Spirit. Jesus says, "I am the truth." And it's not some intellectual idea we have to assent to or agree with. It's an invitation into a journey of experience of uncovering every day a little more of the truth as we deepen in our relationship with him. I am the way and the truth. Have you ever thought about how wild it is that you're alive? One of the things I learned when I was working as a doula was that 70% of all human conceptions end in miscarriage or stillbirth. We can go to the next slide. Or, to put it another way, only 30% of human conceptions produce a live baby. There are thousands upon thousands of things that can interrupt this process. A practically infinite number of ways that things can go wrong. Some of those things happen before conception, during mitosis, the incredibly complex process of creating the egg and the sperm that we learned about back in grade 11 biology class. If one chromosome doesn't pull away properly from the other, you end up with a sperm or egg cell that has two of that chromosome and one on the other side that's missing a chromosome. The one that is missing a chromosome is unlikely to be able to develop enough to get even through the first few weeks of pregnancy. Without enough information to create life, the process falls apart. But the one that has too much information isn't necessarily much better off. This is an image for what happens with trisomy 21, but the same process can happen with any chromosome. Different chromosomes are made up of different amounts of genetic information, though, and the smaller chromosomes, like 21 and 18 to a certain extent, and 13 a little bit less, can just about cope sometimes with the extra genetic information. But the bigger ones, they can't. It would be like trying to put together a piece of IKEA pack-flat furniture where they had melded 3 different instruction sheets into one. It simply wouldn't work to put it together if you had to slavishly follow every single one of those steps. And that's just one of the things that can go wrong before the egg and the sperm meet. Other things can go wrong during pregnancy. Some of them are big things that we kind of know about, exposure to certain chemicals or deficiencies of certain nutrients for the growing fetus. Some of them you've probably never considered, like what happens if you get an extra millimeter of skin covering the end of a ureter so that the urine inside of a fetus can't escape, and the baby's abdomen fills with fluid and the lungs don't have space to develop. Whatever other people might say, whatever shape, size, gender, sexuality, or ability our bodies arrived in or have become, our basic aliveness is miraculous. Even the ancients understood how incredible the process of making a human being was. David puts it this way in Psalm 139 when he says, "For you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, I know that full well. My frame wasn't hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body." But that's not where the miracle or the complexity of life ends. In many ways, as we've sadly been reminded of recently, it's just where it begins. And just like with pregnancy, there are so many factors affecting what will keep us alive. Inbuilt genetic complexity can continue to reveal its painful and broken truths in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. Viruses and bacteria have almost always ravaged those under 5 at a rate far higher than the general population. Nutritional deficits cause the young the most danger as well, and we know the complex economic and ecological forces that can lead to malnutrition and famine. Safety and protection in caring relationships are also just as needed, but not just based on our desires for those things to exist. We know from watching sometimes people in our families, sometimes people in Redwood, the ways that economics and previous trauma, vulnerability and violence can interfere with the process of development and life at almost every stage of our lives. But even this, the continual existence of our breath in our lungs, is not enough for most of us to feel fully alive. See, there's this deep human drive for more than just enough food for our bellies, or shelter to keep us warm and dry, or breath in our lungs. There is a life beyond even that we are seeking, a life of meaning and purpose, connection and well-being, a life that leaves a legacy, a life that makes a difference, a life that includes moments of exhilaration and delight, along with the solidity of everyday tasks, like cooking and cleaning and caring for one another. We have this sense as human beings that there is something bigger that we're meant to be part of. And just like with our genetic code, there are so many options out there yelling and shouting about what the right way to solve this problem is, that it can be really easy to get confused. And so this is where Jesus comes in. Because Jesus, who is fully God and fully human, Jesus, who we are told was there with God before the foundation of the world, Jesus, who therefore was there at the moment of creation, who knows how we are intimately knit together in pregnancy despite the brokenness of our world. Jesus, who has now lived life to the fullest extent of what it means to be a human for 33 years, Jesus sits here at his Last Supper with his friends and says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." The one who knows the intricacies of life from inside our human bodies and as creator of the universe is telling us that the fullness of life is found by following in his footsteps. But this doesn't mean we all have to become clones of one another. And this doesn't mean that we all have to become carpenters in first century Roman-occupied Palestine. This life that Jesus is talking about is the life that comes out of each of us becoming the people Jesus would be if Jesus were us. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And we like to think about it in this kind of linear progression in the West, where one thing leads to the next and the next in a forward motion. But Eastern thought, the thought patterns of Jesus and his disciples at the Last Supper, is much more likely to move in a cyclic pattern like this one, right? It goes around, and then it goes around, and then it goes around, and we keep having to return to each step of the journey. And so this reveals a final thought for us today. This process isn't some single destination we're trying to get to once, and once we've got there, it's complete. There's an ongoing process of choosing to follow the one who is the way, the truth, and the life, no matter how long we've been doing this for. It's one we will always have to keep returning to. If this feels like you've heard it already, I want to remind you that just because we learned the way of how to do things once, just because we learned the way of Jesus once, doesn't mean we can't forget it if we stop practicing it for a while. And a lot of us over the pandemic stopped practicing some of the ways of Jesus for a little while. The way Jesus taught and lived and died and rose again to show us is a way we have to keep practicing every day. It's not enough to just show up here once a week and ignore it the rest of the time. We have to make Jesus' way an intentional part of how we aim to live every day. Likewise, if we want to stay clear on Jesus as the truth, then we have to keep on coming back to Jesus. Everything that anyone ever tells us about the Bible or about Christianity or about politics or about theology or about anything, we have to develop this well-worn path back to Jesus to check this truth against the embodied, verifiable, experiential truth that is Jesus. That's just as true for the things we want to reject as for the things we want to accept. It's just as true for how we think about the people who are treating us badly as for the people who make us feel great about ourselves. It's even true for those arguments we definitely never have with our kids or our parents or our spouses, right? Right? We definitely don't have those. If we want to know the truth that sets us free, we need to keep coming back to Jesus to check our truth with his truth. And if we want life to the full, life to the overflowing, then we need to keep doing the work to show up, to become the people Jesus would be if Jesus were us. We need to lean into the unique giftings and callings God has given each of us to do the work and to ask the questions, to develop those gifts and act on those callings as individuals and as a community. We need to show up for ourselves and each other in the day-to-dayness of life, at barbecues and work days and text messages and phone calls, at work and in our communities, wherever life takes us. And we need to do so with our eyes fixed carefully on Jesus, because that is our best chance at life to the full. If the worship team can come back up, I'll just pray.